Good afternoon and welcome to the NAGDA Connect webinar, Public Service Loan Forgiveness, Temporary Waivers Explained. We're here today to have a thoughtful discussion about this program and how we can be connected to it to help our employers and our employees know more about this really important program, the changes that they made, and how that impacts a lot of our employees' chances of successfully getting some loan forgiveness. I wanted to do a quick introduction of myself, and then I'm going to go over some housekeeping items and a high level overview of what to expect. I will introduce the panelists, and then we will dig in. So my name is Beth Conradson Cleary. I'm with the City of Milwaukee Deferred Compensation Plan and have been a member of NAGDA for the last 5+ years. And the reason why I'm involved in this webinar today is because I started to have a conversation with a couple different people, starting with my employer, City of Milwaukee, and I started to talk with the HR department saying, I think we really need to focus on getting the word out about this program and the changes that were made in October. I myself was keen on what was going on because as someone who has my fair share of student loan debt, I was going through the process too of trying to apply for myself. And so as I was talking to my HR department, they said, great, do you want to do a webinar on it and host it? And I said, well, before I commit, let me look into it. So I dug for about 2.5 hours, looked at this, and I realized, nope, I'm not touching this. We need a subject matter expert to help talk about this to really do it justice. And so fast forward, I actually did some research and found my way to Betsy. And I realized that she is the person that needs to talk to at least our employers about this, our employees. Betsy is a subject matter expert, as you will hear, in student loans in general. She's been in the industry for over 2 decades. And she is the co-founder of TSLA. I'm getting ahead of myself with getting into the introduction, so I'll go back to that in a moment. But once you hear more about Betsy, you'll understand, yeah, she is the person to be talking to us about this, us as plan sponsors, and she actually did a presentation for the City of Milwaukee employees, which we greatly appreciate. So anyways, when we were going through this at the city level, I also reached out to Matt Peterson, the executive director for NAGDA. And I said, hey, Matt, I think we need to bring this to the attention of plan sponsors to make sure that this is on their radar screen, because oftentimes working with DC plans, we are the fulcrum point for financial wellness opportunities and ways to have conversations with our employees about various budget, financial, savings, retirement planning, the whole gamut. And knowing that this is also on the radar screen of our industry is how do you solve for that Hobson's choice of student loan debt, paying that down, and also being able to save for retirement? Because for some people that can be competing options. So that all being said, I did say, hey, Matt, I think this would be helpful if we could reach out to having the conversation on the level of, as plan sponsors, how do we learn more about this? And as you'll hear from Brad, there was actually a survey done with our membership. And it's clear that we all think it's great, and we all think it's a good program, but not a lot of us know how it works or necessarily where to go with it in terms of how to inform our employees, excuse me. So that is a little bit more of in a nutshell why we're having this today and specific to our audience. Real quick, I'm going to go over some housekeeping before we dig in here. A few quick things. We are recording this presentation and it will be emailed along with a copy of the slides to all registrants tomorrow. You'll be muted for the duration of the webinar, but please submit questions throughout the presentation in the Q&A box found in the menu on the bottom of your screen. Your questions will only be visible to the speakers, so please feel free to send those anytime, and we will get to as many as possible at the end. We also have a chat feature open, which you may use to chat with your fellow attendees during the presentation. Also, we did want to thank our NAGDA's visionary and premier sponsors. NAGDA is a mission-driven nonprofit with the goal of being the collective voice of the public sector DC plan sponsor industry. We could not meet this mission without the generous support of the companies you see listed here. NAGDA would like to thank all of you for being terrific examples of long-term partners. Okay, and so it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our presenters today. Bradford, but Brad, I'm sure if you're in trouble, you'll go by Bradford. Bradford Carman is the Director of Solutions Product Management with AIG Retirement Services. And as I alluded to, he's going to get into helping to explain more about the stats and demographics behind who's impacted by student debt and how that has an impact on employees, as well as aspects of the retirement world and the industry in general, and talk about it from that perspective. And then Betsy is, like I mentioned, she is the president and founder of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors, otherwise known as TSLA. And she is our subject matter expert that's going to give you the 10,000 foot level of the program, the eligibility requirements and impact, and that whole spiel. So I will pass it off to Betsy to get us started.
Thank you, Beth. I am really, really excited about this afternoon's presentation. You know, as Beth mentioned, I've been working in the student loan industry, feels like since the earth cooled. And especially since I started TSLA, we do a lot of work with public service loan forgiveness. And one of the things I've realized in working directly, both from the policy side, I was there when these rules were written, as well as working one-on-one directly with borrowers, is that, you know, the best way to educate borrowers to successfully manage this program is through the PSLF eligible employers. Despite the fact that there are a lot more resources and education out there for borrowers about public service loan forgiveness, the most effective and impactful way, and the borrowers that tend to have the most success are the ones that do get support, even if it's just resource support from their employees. So I'm just really tickled to work with NAGDA and Beth and Brad, some like-minded people who understand how important this is. So if we could move on to the next slide. Oh, a little bit more about TSLA. So TSLA is a 501c3 nonprofit that I founded to ensure that all consumers have access to free, expert, and neutral student loan advice. So at our core, the reason we exist, anybody can utilize our website. I'd like to think that it's very comprehensive when it comes to student loans, not just PSLF, and more importantly, in plain English. And then if consumers have questions beyond what they find on our website, they can email us their questions, and we're happy to counsel them for free. We've been around since 2017. We've served over, at this point, over 20,000 borrowers with one-on-one counseling. And that doesn't include people that may have participated in webinars or some other services that we provide to employers or associations. And there's our website, freestudentloanadvice.org. All right, let's get into this. Keep going. And again, okay, on to the meat of it. Okay, so as Beth mentioned, this is not intended to be a full PSLF, know all the things webinar. A true know all the things PSLF webinar takes a solid 90 minutes, especially now with these PSLF waivers. But what I'm hoping that you're going to come away with today is maybe not the 10,000 foot level, but the 6,500 foot level about how the public service loan forgiveness program works. So at its base, what I always tell, this slide I actually have on my full PSLF webinar, because I think it's one of the most important pieces of information. And if you only walk away with one thing as far as the PSLF rules go, this is the slide I want you to remember. PSLF is, you may have seen in the press that it's a difficult program to qualify for, but it really isn't if you take a step back and look at it. PSLF has 3 qualifiers, and the key is you have to fulfill all 3 of those qualifiers at exactly the same time. 95% of the questions that you're ever going to have or you're ever going to get about PSLF can be answered in this slide, which is to qualify for PSLF, you have to make 120 eligible payments, which we're going to define on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. And again, the key here is that all three of these things have to happen at exactly the same time. So you could be making, you could be on an eligible payment plan and have eligible loans, but if you make that payment while you're not working for an eligible employment, then it's not going to qualify, and it can never qualify. Under traditional PSLF rules outside of this really exciting temporary waiver we have now, you could be working for an eligible employer and on an eligible plan, but if you weren't making that payment on an eligible loan, it also can't count. So again, outside of this really temporary short-term waiver, this is the way you qualify for PSLF. You make 120 eligible payments on an eligible loan while working for an eligible employer. And again, all three things have to happen at exactly the same time. They don't have to happen consecutively, however. There's very few things that can cause someone who's pursuing PSLF to have to start all over again. So again, not consecutively, but they do have to happen at the same time. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, this is not the gory detail, but to define all those eligible words I used on the prior slide, an eligible loan is a federal direct loan. Now, most federal loans made since July 2010 are going to be federal direct loans. So if someone has a Stafford loan or a Graduate Plus loan or a Parent Plus loan or a consolidation that's been made since July 2010, then it's going to be a direct loan. One of the myths that is out there about PSLF actually is that Parent Plus loans don't qualify for it. And that's not true at all. Parent Plus loans 100% qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It's a little trickier when we talk about the temporary waivers, and they do have to jump through a few more hoops than other borrowers do, but they are 100% eligible. So when you're thinking about your constituency, you know, a lot of people think about student loan, when they think student loans, they think it's still a young person's issue. And Brad's going to talk a lot more about that. But at the very least, you should be remembering that your constituency, a lot of them probably hold Parent Plus loans. And again, Parent Plus loans, as well as all other direct loans, are eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Now, an eligible payment under traditional PSLF rules. So this part changes a lot with the temporary waiver, but again, that waiver is only temporary. An eligible payment is one that's made on time, and that's defined as within 15 days of the due date, on a direct loan, while working for eligible employment, and under an eligible repayment plan. Now, in general, an eligible repayment plan for public service loan forgiveness purposes is one that's based on income. There are 7 of those. They're all exactly the same, except where they're different. In fact, 2 of them have the exact same name, but completely different terms. So that part can get a little bit confusing to borrowers trying to figure out which income-driven plan works best for their particular situation. But again, in general, you're going to want to be on an income-driven plan to really benefit from public service loan forgiveness. And finally, our last eligible word is eligible employment. Eligible employment under PSLF is another place where we see some consistent myths amongst the public. People think that what matters is what they do for a living. It does not matter at all what you do for a living. What matters is who you work for. So an eligible employer is any government employer, and that's federal, state, local, or tribal. Any 501c3 nonprofit is also considered an eligible employer, and that's full stop. You work for the government, you work for a 501c3, then you 100% work for an eligible employer. You don't need to check any other boxes or jump through any other hoops. There are other nonprofits that are not 501c3s that can also qualify. However, that one's a little trickier. Their whole reason for being has to meet one of about 10 or 12 different focuses, things like public education, public library, early childhood education, public emergency services, public legal, organizations. And even those are a little more not as transparent as they appear to be when you see the list, because each item on that list has a definition behind it that's not necessarily intuitive. But again, the vast majority of borrowers that are pursuing PSLF end up working for a government employer or a 501c3 nonprofit. You do have to be full-time. Now, full-time is defined by the employer. The other alternative is to work part-time for multiple eligible employers, in which case you do need to be working at least 30 hours a week. So, for example, if your employer defines full-time as 40 hours and you're working 35, that's not going to count for PSLF. However, in that scenario, if you go to another eligible employer and just pick up a single hour, so now you're working 36 hours between multiple eligible employers, that would count. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, under traditional public service loan forgiveness rules, you need to make 120 eligible payments, which is a payment that's made on time on a direct loan while working full-time for an eligible employer, and be on an eligible repayment plan. And an eligible repayment plan is one that's based on your income. You can also make what's called the 10-year standard plan is also considered an eligible plan. On October 6th of 2021, the Department of Education announced a temporary waiver to some of the PSLF requirements. Now, this is huge. And quite frankly, the only reason that we're seeing it and that the Biden administration is able to implement this temporary waiver is because of COVID. So I suppose, especially if you're someone who's going to benefit from this temporary waiver, there were some good things about the pandemic. So what the waiver started October 6th of 2021. It ends October 31st of 2022. And by end, all that means is that any borrower that wants to take advantage of the waiver has to raise their hand, so to speak, and take the steps necessary to make sure they qualify for the waiver prior to October 31st, 2022. Now, this is another reason I'm really excited about this webinar and really trying to push PSLF eligible employers to take a more active support and participation in supporting their employees for this program. I am not looking forward to November 1st, 2022, because this waiver has a hard stop of October 31st. If someone, and I guarantee you on November 1st, Tisla will get an email from someone saying, I just heard about the waiver. What do I need to do to qualify? And it's going to be too late, and there's not going to be anybody, not the Department of Education, not me, not a member of Congress, nor anyone in the Biden administration, for that matter, who will be able to make an exception. So that makes it all the more important that we do as much outreach as we can about this waiver. Now, what this waiver does, well, let me start with what it doesn't do. This waiver does not change what eligible employment is considered. So that piece stays the same. You still have to be working full-time for a government employer, 501c3, or some other eligible nonprofits. What it does do is it clears away most of what was defined as an eligible payment in the past. So they're actually not even looking at a borrower's payment history during this waiver. They're just looking for periods of time that the borrower was in a repayment status. So it doesn't matter what plan they were on. It doesn't matter if the payment was late. It doesn't matter if the payment was made on a different type of federal loan. So back before 2010, the primary federal loan program was called the Federal Family Education Loan Program, or the FFEL. And that piece has led to a lot of confusion with borrowers because the FFEL loan program and the direct loan program, once again, they're exactly the same, except where they were different. They both have Stafford loans. They both have Parent Plus. They both have Graduate Plus. They both have consolidation. So one of the trip ups that we've seen a lot of borrowers hit is they thought, oh, I have Stafford loans. That's a federal loan. I must qualify. and then come to find out 7, 8, 9, even 10 years in that none of their payments qualified because they weren't made on a direct loan. They were made on this FEL loan or a Perkins loan. So under this waiver, they're actually allowing payments made on a FEL or Perkins loan to count towards PSLF. But again, the borrower has to take some steps prior to October of 2022 in order to squeeze in under this waiver and get those payments to count. Another big piece of this waiver is normally, so I mentioned earlier that there's very few ways that would cause someone to have to start PSLF all over again. One of the big way that someone might lose out would be by consolidating their loans. So that was the other issue that these poor FEL borrowers have, is they'd find out 5, 6, 7, 8 years in, they were paying under the wrong plan. They can consolidate into direct loans, but that would reset their PSLF count to 0. Under this temporary waiver, any consolidation made prior to October 2022 will not reset the count. So again, that's huge. So consolidation won't reset the count. They're counting any repayment plan. They're counting payments even if they were late, and they're counting payments made on a FEL or Perkins loan, which normally wouldn't qualify. Finally, a big benefit to this waiver is if a borrower has multiple loans that have different counts already under their belt. So that's most likely to happen for someone who went to undergrad, went into public service, and then took time off and went to grad school. So they have some loans, their undergraduate loans have a higher public service loan forgiveness count than their graduate loans do. Under this waiver, if you consolidate all those loans together, the resultant consolidation gets the highest count of all the loans. So just to give you an example, I've been working with some borrowers who had just finished grad school, but had 10 years of public service under their belt already for their undergraduate loans. They were able to consolidate those loans together and get the whole thing forgiven, even though they hadn't made a single payment yet on their graduate loan. So this waiver, I can't emphasize enough how hugely impactful and beneficial it's been to a lot of borrowers. We can go to the next slide. So if you're working with borrowers that are pursuing the waiver, unfortunately, the communications under this waiver have not been great. A big reason for that is that the waiver was rolled out like that. And when I say like that, I mean that the loan servicers found out about it less than 24 hours before it was announced. Now, the reason, so they didn't have time, and frankly, the Department of Education didn't have time to make changes to website language, make changes to letter correspondence, approval letters, denial letters, that kind of thing. They have since made some updates, but the process for getting government correspondence language change can take up to 6 months sometimes. So we can't expect all the correspondence to be updated before the waiver is over. So for that reason, the communications have been confusing. So what we're seeing happening is that when a borrower submits proof of eligible employment and or consolidates during this waiver period, the initial letter they get back, which can take some months, despite the fact that it says that your account's been reviewed under the waiver, is not going to necessarily include all the borrower's repayment history in it. So the count, in other words, the first letter, the count is often wrong. And that throws people into a panic, especially people that consolidated. People that consolidated under the waiver, a lot of times that first letter they get back says they have a count of 0. And they freak out because they think they've made a huge mistake and that they have to start PSLF all over again. It's only after they get the second review done. Now, the second review is the one that includes the data that the Department of Education has. And once they send that to the PSLF servicer and the second count is done, that's when they end up either getting forgiveness if they've already have 120 months in repayment, or they get at least the updated count of how many eligible months they are having under the waiver. The other big source of anxiety for borrowers that I'm seeing right now is just the wait. Unfortunately, there's no place to go to see a clock that says your number 5,448 in the queue for PSLF review. And there's no, well, I should say the algorithm with in what order they're processing these accounts is opaque at best. Is opaque. I've asked many times if there is a particular order they're going in, and I've been told over and over again that there is not, and that's directly from the Department of Education. So I have people that first submitted in January that have already gotten forgiveness, and then I have people that submitted in October that haven't heard a peep. And those people in particular think they've been forgotten. They worry that they have to submit again, and that's just not the case. It's just really a matter of being patient and waiting for them to get to the account. Now, there will still be some errors. Part of the waiver process, and we can thank the Massachusetts Attorney General's office for this, is Fed Loan Servicing, who's the current PSLF servicer, is required to go through every single account they already have on file. So that's over 1 million accounts. So that's part of the reason that we're seeing such a delay. But despite the fact that they're going through all these accounts, there's still going to be errors here and there. So another piece of this waiver is the Department of, although this part is not temporary, the Department of Education is developing a new, what they call reconsideration process, or basically appeal process, specifically for PSLF. And they've said that that's going to be available sometime next month or May at the latest. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just threw a lot at you at a fairly high level regarding public service loan forgiveness. Again, that was not intended to be to explain all the things about the program. I encourage you to either participate in a full webinar, or at the very least go to either my website or the Department of Education's website to get all the gory details if you're interested in both the waiver as well as traditional public service loan forgiveness rules. But just to give you an idea of the impact, what you're looking at here is data from the Department of Education as of September 2021, so right before they announced and implemented the temporary waiver. And as you can see, at that point, there was only a little under 11,000 borrowers who had had their loans forgiven under public service loan forgiveness. And the reject rate was quite high. Since the waivers have been implemented, an additional 70,000 borrowers have had their loans forgiven. So that's just since October. We've seen that many more borrowers get their loans forgiven under the waivers. So that's how important it is. And they expect to process at least another $1 billion in forgiveness under this waiver. And that doesn't include people that might have had 0 payments before the waiver, and now they have 60 or 80 or 100. And are going to be very close to forgiveness, certainly a lot closer than they would have been if this waiver hadn't been implemented. Next slide, please. So why were there so many rejections for PSLF prior to the waiver? Well, frankly, the majority of them was really due to education. Something like 80% of rejected applications were for borrowers that actually hadn't even been in repayment long enough to have made 120 eligible payments. Another 12% had not been working for an eligible employer for at least 120 months. But 45% of the rejected forms were due to employment date error. So, one of the things that we try to do here at TSLA when we work with an employer is we try to do extra training of the department that is filling out these employment certification forms so they can avoid the more typical errors that are getting these employment certification forms rejected in the first place, and therefore reducing some of the anxiety and frustration that has surrounded the public service loan forgiveness program. The public service loan forgiveness servicer, which as of right now is Fed Loan Servicing, but by next year is going to be an organization called MOHELA. Up before the waiver started, they're getting over 700,000 separate employment certification forms per quarter. So that's a lot of forms to go through. And unfortunately, they're up, at least up until the waiver, that is a lot of rejected forms that they were seeing, either because the borrower didn't meet the criteria or because the form was not filled out correctly by the employer. So as I mentioned, if you're looking for more detailed information about public service loan forgiveness, or you're interested in providing more holistic education and support to your constituency about PSLF, I recommend these two websites. The first one, shameless plug, is ours. If you go to our PSLF page, you'll find detailed information about the programs, as well as a really extensive FAQ document about the waivers, including some case studies. And then, of course, the Department of Education's website, where you can also access PSLF information, as well as the PSLF tool, which can be really, really helpful when it comes to applying for PSLF. One thing, a question I think we got before, in the days before this webinar, that I was asked to clarify was the difference between consolidation and refinancing. A lot of borrowers will need to consolidate to get credit under the waiver. Consolidation, the way we use the term in the federal student loan industry, means combining all the loans into one under the federal program. And the only place you can do that is studentaid.gov. Doesn't change your interest rate. They use a weighted average of the underlying loan interest rates. It does extend the term of the loan. Refinancing means when you take the federal loans out of the federal program and refinance them under a new term and new interest rate under a private lender. That could be Discover or SoFi, or there's a ton of them out there. Doing that means you lose potential eligibility for PSLF and other federal benefits permanently. Once a loan is refinanced out of the federal program into the private loan program, unfortunately, there's no take back season, and those loans are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. I think that's all I had. I think I want to turn it back to Beth.
Yes, thank you, Betsy. And there have been a couple questions in the chat. So now that you have a breath, you can take a breath. Betsy, take a look. I tried to answer some, and you can clarify if I did not do it accurately. I'm going to pass it on to Brad, and Brad's going to give us some information about some the data on student loan borrowers and the impact of the debt specific to things that we're concerned about and the different benchmarks that we look at too with the retirement industry. So take it away, Brad.
Thanks, Beth. Since the Great Recession in 2008, outstanding student loan debt has increased over 140%. This is growing faster than any other debt type, including auto, credit, mortgage debt, which has an impact on individuals' ability to save for important milestones in life, such as buying a home, having a child, saving for retirement. This student debt crisis continues to be part of our national conversation, and with borrowers preparing to begin making repayments for the first time since March of 2020, employers have started to begin to discuss how they can best support their employees. And what is weighing on the minds of employers and employees are some of the staggering numbers that we continue to see in the media, social media, every day. The average student loan borrower presently having just under $40,000 in student loans, collectively Americans owing over $1.75 trillion, and the average monthly payment being just under $400. All of these things are having an impact on one's ability to save for various priorities in one's life. As employers have begun to examine the crisis, this is one of the things that we've been focusing on at AIG Retirement Services. With over 45 million Americans carrying student loan debt, everyone's beginning to realize that this is not only a topic impacting younger workers. It's not just our Gen Z and younger millennials, but student debt is impacting all generations. Based on the federal student loan portfolio, the largest concentration of student loan borrowers are between 25 and 34 years of old. There are 22.6 million student loan borrowers under the age of 34. That represents half of all student loan borrowers. But when we look at the actual debt load, it's our older millennials and Gen X that are carrying the largest debt load, accounting for over half of all outstanding loans. And this is a sandwich generation. I see Beth raising her hand, and I'm soon to be part of this sandwich generation where these older millennials and Gen Xers oftentimes are paying off their own student loan debt and now beginning to assist their own children with the Parent Plus loans that we've talked about a number of times over the last 35 minutes. Now, one more statistic of note, and this is one of these statistics that employers will often look at and then start to think of the downstream impact of how it's impacting their workforce. And that is there's 2.3 million borrowers who are 62 years of age or older, collectively right now owing about $87 billion. And of all the age cohorts, this is the number that is growing the fastest. This is the generation that is accumulating the most debt. And now the question becomes, how is this going to impact their ability to retire and to retire on time? Now, while the student loan crisis, sorry, one more slide. Beth. Okay. So while the student loan crisis has impacted all generations, the impact on women has been significant. The American Association of University Women conducted a study a couple of years back and then updated that study recently and reported that women hold almost 2/3 of the country's student debt. Their research showed that those with the scarcest resources are bearing the brunt of the student loan debt crisis here in the United States. The AAUW estimated that women take on average 2 years longer to pay off their student debt than men do. And this number has been exacerbated over the past 2 years due to the pandemic. So providing the resources, tools, education to employees is important. And with the current opportunity before borrowers through the PSLF waiver, this education is almost imperative at this moment in time. Next slide. Beth mentioned earlier in the presentation, early last year, AIG Retirement Services, we conducted a survey with employees and employers. And consistent with everything that Betsy was talking about, despite broad awareness of PSLF, we found that 90% of our respondents indicated they were aware of PSLF. The same study found that the program is underused and few were achieving loan forgiveness. We found 70% of debt holders responding to the study acknowledged having at best a minimal understanding of the rules, the protocols, and 1/3 were just unsure how to maintain qualifications for the program. As Betsy mentioned at the beginning, one of her slides, if you take anything away, that circular slide with the 3 key requirements is probably the most impactful slide you're going to see. Something that if you're able to, when you receive this presentation, that's something you want to be able to capture and provide to employees so that they understand the basics. And as previously mentioned by Betsy with some of the statistics on rejection, oftentimes a lot of these rejections of applications tie right back to those 3 key requirements. So gaining an understanding, a functional knowledge of those is going to be important. Again, that's why it's consistent, that it's the consistent access to resources in education is going to be critical to our employees' success so that they'll be able to achieve forgiveness, specifically in the near term under the PSLF waiver, but for employees beyond October 31st, achievement of forgiveness under the PSLF program. Next slide. So over the past 2 years, AIG Retirement Service, we've been working with employers to assist their employees in providing the educational resources necessary to achieve forgiveness. And I'd like to share with you some of the best practices that we've identified over the past 2 years. And in talking to Betsy, in her 20+ years of experience, she was in line with some of these same teachings where incorporating education as part of the comprehensive financial wellness strategy has proven to be the most successful. Employers are trusted. Employers are often seen as resources for information and oftentimes the best place for employees to go to find this information. So employers that we've worked with have offered educational webinars. They're distributing employee emails and newsletters consistently throughout the year to their employees, oftentimes directing them to an intranet site. So they'll take a benefits page within their own HR department and put all of those important links, many of which Betsy has just shared with you. Another thing employers can do is consider offering a wellness benefit, whether that's student loan assistance for recent graduates or parents of graduates. But oftentimes employers will start to look at college planning counseling for employees whose children will be attending school in the near term, or for employees who themselves will be attending grad school. Understanding how student debt is accumulated and the decisions that go into that can often be a very impactful as part of the planning process. Again, a consistent, steady stream of information has been proven to increase plan awareness and understanding. This is not a topic that can just be communicated once or twice a year, especially this year with the PSLF waiver expiring on October 31st. Monthly communication and reminders will significantly increase awareness and action amongst employees. And again, that's where what we have found is that the employers being involved in this is critical. As a retirement service provider, we will often work with a subset of employees, but often, especially when we look at our government employees in 457B plans, participation may range anywhere from 30 to 60%. So we do not communicate with all of the employees. So that's why we provide the information and the resources to make available for all employees, regardless of their participation in their retirement plan. And then lastly, talk to your retirement service provider and your on-site financial professional to see how they can support your efforts to educate your employees. Many organizations in the industry have content available through their financial wellness series. And because this is such a critical part of financial wellness and the ability for those to save for their financial future, they're often more often than not extremely happy to assist with their resources and ability to conduct webinars and individual one-on-one conversations to further knowledge of this important topic.
Thank you, Brad.
And I know we've had a number of questions, and hopefully
it looks like
we have
Betsy's
time to get through them.
Yeah, Betsy's been working the keyboard.
I got him.
I'm just going to piggyback off of Brad's really good overview of some ideas of how we as plan sponsors can get in the game and help our employees understand more about their options with student loans in general, but specific to these changes, which is, again, going to be sunsetted on Halloween of this year. So the thing that we've done with the city of Milwaukee, just as like an example, is first off, we've been working really closely with our HR department, and that is critical because that is where the employer certification component, which is a requirement of this program, comes into play. So you want to get on the same page with them. And one thing I learned, Betsy mentioned about some little tips and tricks about how to be successful with this program so these applications don't get rejected. I'll give you one example. If you have your employer HR department certify employment and they use DocuSign to sign it, and they're using a generic font, from what I understand, those get rejected. So you need an actual wet signature, or you need an actual image of like a messy human signature. That's just one little example, but I was able to communicate once I learned that to my HR department, and now they made that change, right? Otherwise, who knows how many people would have been rejected as a result of that one little thing. The other thing that we did, we took a step back and we took a look at all of our websites on our city for employees, and we said, okay, so where does it speak to this program and where to go, where to get this information, how to connect the dots. And we realized we had to dust off the information that we had out there because, again, this was a sleepy program that had a very low success rate. So we had to revive it and put information in and make sure that it was accurate and just kind of get everybody pointed in the right direction so you're not pinballing people with information. And then the other thing that we did in January, and we have a recorded version of this, is we actually worked with Betsy and her organization. Like she said, to do this program justice in terms of an overview, you need a solid 90 minutes. So we did a presentation, a financial wellness presentation for a flat fee. It was very reasonable through TISLA. And just to note, it is free advice for consumers, but they do have a couple things where they offer to employers, but it was very reasonable. And we were able to have that presentation, have it explained very thoroughly. We had 300 people sign up for it, and a bunch more that couldn't make it that wanted to. And then a lot of people had specific questions and they emailed TISLA the next day and got an answer, and they're very prompt. They try to do a turnover within 24 hours. So that was really helpful, basically saying, okay, we don't know all the answers, but we can connect the dots on the administrative side. Because if you take a step back and you think of those three three main portion of the pie for this program. All of us qualify in terms of being government employees for this program. So that one, check off the box. If you can help people understand how to consolidate their loans to be direct loans, if that's the issue, that's where you give them the resources to figure out their unique situation. And there is like a gazillion different scenarios that are unique out there. So you just got to give them the information of where to go to figure it out. And then the third thing is just the time. And so have they put in the time to qualify? But we know for sure we do qualify as employers in government for this program. So that's why it's a slam dunk to get the word out. Okay, I will pass it back on. I believe it's to Betsy again. Let's see. No, I'm so sorry, to Brad. Brad, we're going to talk about the impact to employees and employers in providing PSLF and overall student loan support. Or did you already went through that? My apologies. Yep. You just clarified for that. Now we're actually to the discussion and Q&A part. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to go over, Betsy, from the chat that you've been answering questions on.
Yeah, you know what? I started to type an answer to this one. Someone said, what are the steps to take advantage of the waiver? That is one of those things that you need to either read all the things or go through a full presentation, because the answer to that varies depending on the borrower. Some borrowers don't need to do anything. They're going to automatically be given credit under the waiver. Other people have to consolidate and then submit proof of eligible employment, maybe from multiple employers. So it really it depends on the borrower themselves and their situation of what they might have to do, if anything, to get credit under the waivers. And then another question just came in. It sounds like public higher education employees also qualify for this program. Absolutely. And in fact, I love this question because it gives a great example of one of the myths that I mentioned before. So yeah, any public college, including a community college, would almost certainly be considered an eligible employer for PSLF purposes. And I guarantee you that at least the faculty is probably, and financial aid office is probably aware that they are working for an eligible employer and that PSLF exists. Who probably doesn't know is every other employee at that university. And they are all potentially eligible for PSLF just by the nature of who they work for. Your groundskeepers, your cafeteria workers, excuse me, your IT people. Again, it doesn't matter what you do, it matters who you work for. And, we're starting to see, at least TSLA is starting to see an uptick of employers that are starting to recognize how valuable this program is. We're working with a big hospital group in New York right now that they're unable to give raises and haven't been able to. So they're using PSLF and doing active PSLF support to use it as a retainment tool. And they're starting to use it as a recruitment tool. They're adding the fact that they're a PSLF eligible employer to their new job postings. And there are people that specifically search for PSLF eligible jobs. So I think they're going to be it's really going to help them in their recruitment and retainment moving forward.
That's an excellent point, Betsy. And I know with our plan, the conversations that we're having, we have all of our record keeper educators, when they have conversations with employees, we have asked them to bake in the question, are you experiencing student loan debt? And if so, are you aware of this program? And just to kind of get it out in front of them. We've also been flanking them in a lot of different ways through emails, through newsletters, any opportunity we can, we try to get it out in front of them. I've met with the mayor's cabinet heads to make sure that all department heads know about it. And interestingly, almost like everybody on that call was like listening with bated breath, because pretty much everyone wanted to know about it themselves personally, because they all had a bunch of loan debt. So you'd be surprised once you get it out there, the interest to know more and to learn more. And when we do have these conversations about financial wellness specific to our plan participants, they've actually worked out really well from the standpoint of, once people can start to think about not having a loan payment, and granted, I know those of us who do have loan payments, it has been suspended and it has been pushed out beyond May, thankfully. But when those do start up again, like assuming you do qualify and you do get your loan forgiven, that's a significant chunk of your monthly budget. And that gives you some breathing room. And so what does that mean for your retirement planning goals and what you could do to potentially save more there because you're not having to worry about another bill? So those types of conversation, it opens the door for all of that, which has been really helpful.
The other questions that have come through have really been more individualized or technical in nature, so I don't know if they're necessarily appropriate for the whole group.
The other thing that I will say, and this has been a theme with other presentations that I've heard spoken to at NAGDA, but to have successful programming to reach our employees, a key thing is coordination between departments. And a lot of times, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but other departments tend to look to us to be the ones with answers or the ones that they could defer employees to. Which I'm fine with. And then if I don't know the answer, I will plug into resources like TISLA, for example, or NAGDA to get more information. But the coordination part has been really helpful and key, and just opening those lines of communication. So if you haven't already done that, I know it's different for all of us. Sometimes we're at the state level, we're at the municipal, city level, it's all different. But just to identify who are the stakeholders and making sure that everybody is aware of this on the same page, and how can we best collaborate to get the word out, and whether it's cross-referencing links on people's websites or finding out the channels of communication to send specifically targeted emails, whatever it is, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for synergy, and that's how it really helps to get the word out too.
You're absolutely right, Beth. We actually, there's some employers that they support their employees by once a year, they send out the link to the Department of Education or our website about PSLF and just remind their employees that they're eligible and encourage them to do their own research, which, I wish every single PSLF employer did at least that. And then there's others, as we mentioned, that offer regular webinars, or they have access to interactive training modules. And then the employers that want to do more than that and do more proactive support, we have a program here that we offer employers called PSLF Peace of Mind. And that includes very extensive training, not only of the employees, but we help the employer create what we call PSLF ambassadors. So those are people on the ground that have a very solid knowledge of PSLF. And those are the people that tend to do the coordination like you were talking about, and making, helping to make sure that, for example, the PSLF education is built into new employee orientation, and that the regular reminders about the program are going out. And the employers that I've worked with that have done that, we've seen, the way we see the impact is how many more employees are reaching out to TISLA for free help on the counseling. And we always see a huge uptick when that happens. And then even better, when we get the messages from those employees saying my loans just got forgiven. That's awesome.
And I will say too, the other thing to note about student debt, for the longest time, I was trying to understand, to what extent is this an issue for my participants, for people within the city? Like what Brad was saying, those numbers are pretty staggering, especially when you look at the different age groups, and if you have an understanding appreciation of how it touches so many different people along in their various life chapters. And we actually put the question out there, and so part of it is like figuring out how can we ask that question, what kind of survey can we put to the employees. And we had a wellness survey done when we had it in person we basically did a health assessment, and people did it. It was incentivized. They were incentivized to do it because they could have some money savings with their health insurance and their HSA. And so they were, butts in chairs, sitting there getting their pinprick with their blood, and they're getting their BMI measured and everything. And they have this survey, and it's a wellness survey that the city has. And I asked the HR department, hey, can you throw in a couple questions about student loans? So that was the first time we've ever asked that question. And the reason why I chose that survey is because we have a success rate of over 80% of our employees who actually go and do that health assessment. So that was a captured audience where we could start looking at that question. We're going to start doing more polls like that to have a better understanding, because the more we can dive into whether or not is this a relevant issue for people, what can we do about it? The more we can help work with them and work and figure out some tools for their needs. So it looks like I think we have all the questions that have been answered. So I think this is a good place for us to give you back a few minutes at the end of our presentation. I just want to thank you guys for tuning in and for spending some time with us. Hopefully you picked up a few nuggets. It's a ton of information, and don't be overwhelmed. It's drinking from a fire hose. But the good thing is that there are some great resources out there that we can point our employees to, and we can help them, and hopefully they can be successful with this program. So thank you.